Thomas Vozzo. As a global business executive with a proven track record, leading highly successful businesses in the service, retail, and distribution industries. His definition of transformation changed dramatically with his introduction to Father Greg Boyle, an LMU alum, we might say parenthetically, the founder of Homeboy Industries. As he began working at the nonprofit organization, Vozzo himself noted, quote, "The blind spot I had is typical for so many of us. Through no fault of my own, by just being in the mainstream of society, we stay isolated from those most unlike ourselves and outside of our station in life." In 2012, Vozzo started serving as the CEO of Homeboy Industries, the largest and most successful gang rehabilitation and reentry program in the world. Vozzo is a non-paid employee, has led the organization, bringing his business expertise and wisdom to implement a strategic and mission-driven plan, resulting in a near tripling of the size of the organization and increasing its impact. Its impact in helping Homeboy Industries thrive over the last several years. Vozzo says he has gained knowledge and insight about my own spirituality and the plight of the underserved and marginalized in our society. In 2020, Homeboy was awarded the prestigious Conrad N. Hilton Humanitarian Prize for its humanitarian impact. Vozzo has also launched a $15 million Homeboy Ventures and Jobs Fund, which will enable like-minded people a way to invest in businesses that produce quality jobs which lead to real economic impact for our society. In his first book, The Homeboy Way, A Radical Approach to Business and Life, he gives readers practical ways to address some of the most searing and vexing social issues and provides a new path for personal and business leadership. Vozzo shares lessons learned both in secular business as well as faith-based pursuits to help readers from all walks of life thrive. It is Vozzo's great work. It is Vozzo's goal to work himself out of the current CEO role and to get out of the way, to make room for the homeboys and homegirls to run Homeboy. He is confident that they will lead the organization to a bright future. Ladies and gentlemen, Thomas Vozzo.
Good afternoon, everybody. Happy to be here and happy to tell the Homeboy story. And there's a lot of sub-stories to the Homeboy story and some sub-stories to my story. So let me begin by telling you two small stories that really contrast the two lives I've now lived as a corporate executive, now as someone who runs a nonprofit organization. And so the first is when I worked in the corporate world. We were a $10 billion business, and we had been private for a number of years, and we went public in the early 2000s. And that first year after becoming a public company, we were hosting a Investor Analyst Day. And that's when public companies invite in the analysts of Wall Street, and we bring them in, we give them all the dog and pony show, we show them how we're going to make our business plans come to fruition, and they get to ask questions, and we feed them, we vet them. It's like all that stuff. We try to want to impress the analyst. And so I still remember, I can vividly remember this, as we're standing at the beginning of the office door, as we're saying goodbye to these Wall Street analysts. I'm standing there with the chairman of the corporation, and this young analyst comes up, probably 25 years old. Here's the chairman, has been there for 30 years. He's late 50s, early 60s. And I remember this one analyst said to him, "So thank you for the day, but I don't believe you're going to make your 40 cents a share earnings target that you have as a public company. I think you're only going to do 39 cents. And if you only do 39 cents, it's not going to be good on the street." And so then with that, the analyst spun on his heels, walked out the door, jumped into the limo that we had waiting for him to take him to the airport, right? And then just as that was happening, I still remember the chairman turns to us and says, the tyranny of the pennies. And he said, "We can't miss our earnings per share target, that we have to do all we can or else heads are going to roll all for that one extra penny, from 39 cents a share to 40 cents a share. All right, so there's that story. Fast forward, I'm at Homeboy Industries. I'm trying to learn what it's like to be in that environment. I often sit down in Father Greg's office and we talk about the situation. Earlier in one of those days, I was in our merchandise store, and one of our trainees, we call our clients trainees, one of our trainees come up to me, and he starts talking about another trainee, a woman who was actually having difficulties, and he was saying, what can we do to help her? And I said, well, what do you mean? He says, well, we've seen that she's not looking good, she's looking unhealthy, and in fact, she's not eating breakfast or she's not eating lunch. I said, well, why? And so I'm sitting down, I'm talking to Greg, I said, how can we help this woman? And it turns out she was not eating lunch because she needed to save her money because she couldn't afford diapers for her baby. And so it struck me right then, I was like, wow, you can't afford the basic necessities of your children, right? And it's so hard. And so then Greg turns and says to me, the tyranny of the diapers. So in that moment, I get tyranny of pennies from a corporate chairman about how we have to sort of do all we can on Wall Street. And Father Greg says tyranny of the diapers, and how the struggles of the poor in our society have impossible choices that they have to make every day just to get by. And so think about, as I go on to the rest of this talk, is that put those two contrasts in mind and see how we can blend those two worlds, sort of make for a more sustainable environment as we move forward. So a little bit about me. So I had a great career. As many would say, I reached the pinnacle of a corporate executive, right? I ran a $2 billion business, corporate executive of a $13 billion business. We were a private company, public company, private company, all those things. Our corporation had 250,000 employees, right? We made acquisitions, we bought companies, we sold companies. We were a service business, and how well you perform your services, how well you get your next set of businesses. So by all definitions, I was doing great. I felt it. I've lived a charmed life. But something along the way didn't make sense for me is that definition of winning, right? In many ways, the business world has this definition of winning of shareholder value, how much money you make, how high you go up in your career. But there's a little bit something missing along those lines. And listen, I still believe in businesses are good for our society. A well-run business is good for our communities that we all live in, right? And what are the definitions of a well-run business? A well-run business has three attributes. It competes effectively in the marketplace. It wins, and it provides good shareholder value. The second is it has products and services that people want to give you money for, that they're willing to part their money for your product and service. And third, and most importantly, it's about being a great place to work for people, that people's lives, their dreams can come true in their work, that it's a safe work environment and it's a good work environment. And so a well-run company keeps those three things in balance along the way. And the need to create quality jobs is what's going to move our economy forward. So again, I'm still a business guy. I have now learned, though, there's a downside of some parts of this business, and now I have learned at Homeboy how to help people really in the context of a job. And so I chose to leave that corporate job. You know, those high-end executive jobs have a certain amount of shelf life. And to me, I had a yearning to go learn more, not just about myself, about society and how we can actually run businesses in a different way to help people. I never imagined I would show up at Homeboy Industries, but I did. And over this last decade, I've learned a lot about working at Homeboy Industries. So I stand here today pretty clear on many things, and I'm going to talk more about this going forward, but I want to say I know my life now is far richer for having spent time with gang members who are looking to transform their life. Far richer. I would have never had that experience anywhere else. I see that joy and authenticity are just right around the bend, but you got to be willing to go look for it. I see that moving to the margins, to be in kinship with others, is what God had intended for all of us to do. And I see how kind-hearted people help other people, and that's truly how help occurs. And I also know that there's dignity of having a job. And so if we can combine all of these things, we can, I think, create a better environment, a better business environment, and have sustainability in our society to move people forward. But let me take you back a little bit. I'm going to give you more of my insights and talk about the graces I've experienced at Homeboy Industries. But I want to take you a little bit back to my corporate career. I already mentioned we were a for-profit corporation. We were a business services company, so I ran the uniform businesses. We did food services, so you have a dining hall here, and you have companies that do that type of food service. We did food services for hospitals and universities and stadiums, and we also did cleaning. We swept floors. So not sexy businesses. None of those businesses have any special technologies or patents, and so how well you do that business is how well you get your next business. How well your frontline workers do in their jobs really is very correlated to how good your management team is. And so at our corporation, we spent a lot of time on training managers and leaders, because if you have good leadership, you're going to succeed in the marketplace. And so for me, I think back to all the training I had. Someone early on in my career sort of saw my, there's ability in me, and they wanted to invest in me. And so I've got a lot of investment into me. And so many of you are too young in this audience to know, but there's a TV show called The $6 Million Man. Anybody know that TV show? The older folks know that show, but in the 70s. But essentially, it's a show about, there was an astronaut, crashed, and the Army said, no, that guy's too valuable. We're not going to let him die. We're going to actually make him better. So they put bionic arms and legs into him. And so the thesis is, he's stronger than everybody else. He's faster than everybody else. He's our weapon to go stop evil in the world, right? And so it's about that investment. I often thought about what was invested into me in the corporate world was to have learned those $6 million man skill sets. Because if I was a better executive, the corporation does better. If I was a better executive, the people who worked in the corporation do better. And so, they flew me to St. Louis. They had all sorts of tests. I did psychological tests. Psychiatrists asked me about my background. I did IQ tests, all those things to sort of scientifically figure out who I am. And then after they learned that, then give me special training. So I went to all these different business schools and all along the way. It's the smart thing to do if you're in the for-profit world and you want to move your company forward. But I thought of myself, like, well, at some point, I'm just like the $6 million man. They just wind me up and point me, and I have to go attack what they want me to attack. And while I felt great about being invested in, I also knew I don't make all the decisions. I got to do what they say. And so the seminal moment in my business career, my for-profit business career, came about in 2008. There was a great recession. The recession in 2008 is different from the recession we just experienced through this pandemic. In 2008, it was a long recession. The economy shrunk by 10% really quickly, and many companies laid off 10% of the workforce along the way. And so a lot of workforce reductions were there. In 2008 was just a year or two after we became a public company, and so we had our reputations to put in place. So here's the seminal moment. So I was 2 days before Christmas visiting my in-laws in Philadelphia, and we went out food shopping, my wife and I, and to get ready for the Christmas meal. And I still remember this. So the chairman of the corporation calls me up, 6 o'clock, 2 days before Christmas, so Christmas Eve, right? And I'm talking to him in the parking lot of the food store. It's raining outside. My wife goes inside and does the shopping, right? And he's asking me, Tom, how are we going to finish the year? This is the recession year. My businesses, top line is $2 billion. Our profit line was $150. We did a lot of smart things, and our profit was going to come in at $140 million. But that's it, $140 million of pure profit. And so we missed it by 10 million. And he tells me, he berates me, Tom, that's not good enough. We said we made commitments to Wall Street, and we need to satisfy those commitments. And so as he's berating me, I'm thinking, I know what it's going to take to get that extra $10 million. I know I have to go lay off another 600 people. And I know those are the people that we're going to need after the recession's over. And I know these people have been dedicated to the company for over 20 years. They thought they had security and safety in their job. They've worked really hard. They've cared. And I'm thinking to myself, well, wait a minute, we're firing these people because we got to live up to our reputation on Wall Street as great financial performers. And I also am smart enough to know that that extra penny a share, the difference between that $10 million, that extra penny a share is not going to make a hill of beans difference to the long-term valuation of the corporation. And so I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we're actually affecting people's lives over some concept, not real necessity. And so something stuck in me at that point. I said, ooh, this is wrong. Well-run companies try to keep shareholder value and employees in balance, but all of a sudden when push came to shove, it came out of balance and employees lost. And so something in me was yearning to find a way of how do we do business where employees are maybe not on top, but employees are equal with everybody else. And so, look, we were a public company, we just went private. I didn't make all the final decisions. I saluted and did my job, but I knew at some point I had a yearning to go off and learn something different. And so when I left Aramark, left that position, a friend of mine I'm on the board of Salvation Army of Los Angeles. A friend of mine on the board invited me down to the Homegirl Cafe for lunch because he wanted to get me involved, the Homeboy, and be on the board. And I'm sitting there having lunch at the Homegirl Cafe, and I invite all of you down to the cafe as well. And I'm sitting there having lunch, and we're talking about it, and I never knew anything about Homeboy. And I'm looking around, I'm seeing the workers, right? I'm seeing the people. They're engaged in what they want to work on. They're smiling to customers. They're talking to each other. Something, oh, this is actually a pretty good environment, that in the context of a job, they're changing their lives. And then I also realized that just 6 months prior when I was in my corporate job, I would have never hired any of those folks because it was not just a tattoo on their face. It was the felony they had, is that they were gang members. I just would never have hired them. And yet, here they are. Actually, I'm pretty impressed with what they're putting together and doing. And so when I got asked to get involved, I wanted to learn more about it because the values lined up. And so I came on as a volunteer, and and then a couple months later, Father Greg asked me to come on as CEO. I didn't think I was going to do any of that leadership again, but I couldn't pass up the opportunity to be in Father Greg's orbit for a bit of time. And I had all the hubris of a corporate executive because at that time, Homeboy was going through a financial crunch. And so I said, I'll be here 6 months and help figure it out and move off and do something else. I'm here 10 years later and loving the job. And so there's a lot to be said about Homeboy. What I first want to do is show you a little video about it, and it frames it all up for you.
It's sort of a similar thing when you say, wow, I went to the soup kitchen today and I fed all these homeless people. I got more than I gave, But it's deeper than that because it's really about people entering into relationship with each other that is mutually life-giving. Or a reporter asked me once, how's it feel to have saved thousands and thousands of lives? I go, I don't know what you're talking about. I know that my life is saved every day that I'm here. I know that I get rescued every second that I'm in this office.
Homeboy Industries, for me, was my starting point to a successful future as a man and as a law-abiding citizen.
This is a place where an individual can walk through and change his life around and become a productive member of society.
Gangbangers are more than just gangbangers, they're human beings. And a lot of individuals are born into it, and a lot of individuals are there not because they want to be. What Homeboy Industries did for me, it gave me an opportunity to have a voice. And that's something I didn't have growing up. No one ever took the time to listen.
Gang members spend a lot of time stuck in a despair that's pretty bleak. Gang violence is really about the lethal absence of hope. A great many of them are so deeply, hugely traumatized. So if you don't transform your pain, you keep transmitting it.
So my mom raised me the best that she could, but the best that she could was a lot of violence, a lot of abuse, mental, verbal, and physical. My outlet was the streets. My outlet was drugs. I ended up living in the back of a trash can on Skid Row.
Homeboy stands with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop. There isn't anybody who doesn't belong to this community of kinship.
Kinship at Homeboys,
For me, that was a big word. Kinship. What is kinship?
these opposing gang members working hand in hand, you know, baking bread and making coffees in a cafe.
You know, different races, different cultures, different beliefs coming into one roof.
It's not about, I will heal you and you will receive the gift of my healing. It's about mutuality, that we're all in need of healing. We're all a cry for help. All the people who run the place now, those are transformed lives, transforming other lives.
I got the opportunity to be a drug counselor, you know, and now I'm helping others. The tricky thing about it, the funny thing about it is that I work 2 blocks away from that corner where the trash can was at that I used to live at on Skid Row.
I've key gripped several shows, several commercials, several music videos. I best scored 80% of the time. If Homeboy Industries didn't exist, then I don't know where I'll be at today. I don't know if I'll still be in the streets. I don't know if I'll still be incarcerated. I don't know if I'll be in the film industry. I have no idea.
What if we believed that no lives matter less than other lives? What if we were to invest in people rather than just try to incarcerate our way out of problems?
It's just part of being the family of Los Angeles, and we've got to do it.
I've seen that video 24 times. And it still gets me listening to Andre and Jose. Jose said he lived in a trash can. Think about it. Lived in a trash can for weeks. Andre's story. Mother didn't want him to go to school. Didn't want to go to grammar school. He was wondering why the kids in his neighborhood, why they all went off to school. She didn't want him to go to school. She wanted to keep him home. She wanted him to be the lookout for the drug deal. One day, he said, I'm going to school. He wanted to go to school. He hopped on the bus, went to school. Came home. His mother was gone. She abandoned him. He went into the foster system. Think about it. The next 15 years of his life, he feeling the shame that he sent his mother away because he didn't listen to her? How can we, this is like people, it's like people have such trauma. And we as a society need to help them along the way. And think about what makes Homeboy so successful is that we help people like Andre and Jose, and they make a difference. And the secret sauce is simply love, kinship, non-judgment. People walk through our doors, we don't judge them by the color of their skin, the tattoos on their face, the crimes they've done. We just help them. And it's pretty extraordinary of what happens. So I'm going to allow some slides to flash up here, and these are just good images, so I'm going to keep talking. Feel free to enjoy the images along the way. Homeboy Industries is a place where first chances happen for people that never had chances in their life to be successful, and where healing happens for sure. Foundational healing happens. When you walk into Homeboys, when I first came to Homeboy, it's so different from anything you've experienced, right? And so, and I've come to say, how can other organizations and companies mimic what Homeboy does? And that's kind of what really the rest of this I want to talk about, and how to help people move their life forward. And one of the things you feel at Homeboy that's so different, you walk through those doors, and it's a palpable energy. You feel that people want to change their life. You feel they can find joy and happiness. You feel like they, for the first time in their lives, there's a safe environment where they can just be themselves. They can laugh, they can cry, they're not going to be judged by any of that. Right? And so here's the guy, the $6 million man guy, who, give me the rules of the business, I'm going to work really hard and win, and live within that. Here I come to the Homeboy, and it's filled with joy, happiness. So one of the first disconcerting things for me is when you walk into Homeboy, you get hugged. You don't hug in the corporate world. HR professionals tell you not to hug people, right? And so I'm still not a good hugger. When people hug me, I kind of like stand to the side, right? But there's all sorts of hugging. There's heart-to-heart hugging, side-to-side hugging, all that stuff. But there's an aspect of we're here as a community. We're here together. There's also an aspect of happiness and laughter, right? And listen, I've been in the corporate world. You go to a meeting. Every meeting is a little bit, you start with a joke, but it's a snarky joke. It's sarcastic. You go to a Homeboy, and you have meetings with people, you talk to people. There's laughter, there's jokes, but it's self-deprecating. It's being humble. There's a sparkle in people's eyes. And so it's that sort of feeling like we're all here together. Clearly, another difference is that at Homeboy, we're a very, very diverse population. 80 or 85% people of color, for sure. There are so many times I'm in the meeting, I'm the only white guy there. And I say that only for contrast that in my corporate career, in my whole 26-year corporate career, there's never been more than 20% people of color in any of those meetings along the way, right? And so just there you think, okay, well, Homeboy's doing something right. What are they doing, and how's that all coming together? But also, I also came to learn is running businesses with our population is different, and the challenges our folks have. A couple stories. We have a merchandise store. We sell Homeboy hats, shirts, mugs, that type of thing. I remember first couple months after working at Homeboy, there was a fellow there named Abaku, and he had just come after a long stint in prison, right? And my role early on was to help the businesses, and so thereby I'm looking for, hey, who knows how to do the work, who wants to sort of run the operation. And I was always pretty impressed with Abaku. He was a quiet guy, but he was responsible, showed up early, opened the store up, he cashed out the register. He's one of the ones we could depend upon. But then one weekend came along, and one Monday came along, Tuesday came along, and I was asking, where's Abaku? Turns out he got picked up and sent back to prison. And so it was the first stark reality for me that here's a guy, went to prison, did a long stint, paid his debt to society, came out, doing all the right things, working hard, living all the right rules on parole. They picked him up for a crime he did 25 years prior, right? And so now he's back into prison, and his life's going to spin all downwards. Now, I'm not saying what he should get off for 25 years ago, but he's clearly the person who has clearly paid his debt to society and changed his life and working on changing his life. And so it makes you wonder, what good does it do sending someone back after a crime from 25 years ago that he got implicated with? Another story. So at Homeboy, we try to put all our folks, we call them trainees, in all type of jobs. And so one of my jobs we had as an executive assistant, a secretary for me, right? And so Joanna, I had many of them, but Joanna's one of them I want to talk about. Joanna went to youth camp. Youth camp is youth jail in LA County, right? And so she got in and out of youth jail. She came to Homeboy looking to change her life, was frustrated, angry at life, angry at the situation she's in. She got tattoos all over her face, just lived a tough life. Came to Homeboy, ended up getting pregnant, became a single mother at 18 years old, right? But she's in our program, we're here to help her, right? And thankfully we have a lot of women in our program who have been good mentors for her, right? But Joanna became my executive assistant. She did a great job, she cared, she worked hard. Didn't get everything right. Anybody tries to get the Homeboy and tries to get me an email, calls me, things always sometimes go wrong. But she showed up every day and worked really hard. And she went to her counseling, she went to her therapies. She was doing what you want her to do. She had custody of her child, for sure. She lived in shelters. She had no place to live. She lived in shelters the whole time with us. Okay, care about her job. So like any organization, we have a board of directors. We meet once a quarter. We have 7:30 a.m. meetings in the morning. Joanna would always show up an hour beforehand, figure out how to get her daughter taken care of, show up at 6:30, make sure the tables were set up, the water is out, the papers are there. Right. One day before a board meeting, Joanna's parole officer calls her. and says that she needs to report into the Office of Parole at 8 a.m. the next day to fill out paperwork. And Joanna says to the parole officer, well, I have responsibilities. I need to help set up for a meeting. I got a job to do. Parole officer said, doesn't matter. If you don't show up at 8 a.m. to fill out this paperwork, we're going to violate you and you're going to go back into the prison system. Right? And so Joanna's frustrated, upset, and obviously we're a homeboy. We say, it's okay. We'll cover it. You go take care of your business. But how many other companies would allow her to go to her parole office without really much notice? Maybe, a fair amount maybe would have. Some would say, no, if you don't show up, you're fired, right? Also, how many companies, how many employees would be willing to tell their boss, hey, I have to go see my parole officer? I mean, there's shame in that, too, right? And so the point is, the folks that we're working with a homeboy have to do a lot of healing, but society wants to make them productive members of our society by giving them a job. That's not easy. It's not easy to give them a job in that sense. And so you have to overinvest and you have to bring in more resources for people. You have to be willing to let Joanna to take time off to go see a parole officer. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is what I've learned at Homeboy is, it's not a special insight here, but there are two Americas. The America of the privileged, which I think we all probably exist in, and then the America of the forgotten, of the poor, of the demonized. It is so very hard to be in the America of the forgotten. It's just massively different. I just said about Abaku and Joanna in terms of their struggles, right? There's also the healthcare is so different. Schooling is different. If you are in county, if you go to youth camp, youth jail, you come out, public schools don't have to take you back in. But you're back on the streets running with the gang. They won't take you back in. So we have a charter high school. But the struggles of the working poor in our country are significant. There's one story I'll tell you, Tammy, African-American woman, just really addicted to drugs. She used drugs to just self-medicate along the way. She would be in and out of our program along the way. And she was always, whenever she was with us, she had a great smile. She'd radiate the room. She'd be happy. She would chit-chat with me quite a bit. I kind of valued my time with Tammy in terms of knowing how many struggles she had. She still found a way of kind of bringing joy to others along the way. So there's two parts of Tammy's story. One part is, so I remember we have what's called counsel, where we try to help a group of people get together, talk about folks who need help. So I remember in the dialogue, someone brought up Tammy's name, and she was about to be evicted, and she needed $300 to avoid eviction, and she was asking for money. Now, we at Homeboy, we give a lot of money to people. We stretch every nickel we can, but in our history of time, sometimes we have like no money, and literally we had no money. So the case manager said, Tammy, can't help you today. This is Thursday. But come Monday, we think we get enough donation checks coming in. Come Monday, we can help you along the way. Okay, so Monday comes along, and Tuesday the case manager reports back, and Tammy's in there crying with the case manager, crying with shame. Because what she did was she turned to prostitution that weekend to make the $300 so she wouldn't be evicted. And of course, there's massive shame to all that, right? And the struggle is, Tammy's struggle of how to help her, how to not help so she can not get into that situation each time. How do we have a support system around? Fast forward the story with Tammy. So she ends up having a heart condition. At mid-30s, she goes in and have open heart surgery. Heart condition, open heart surgery. 2 days later, she's back at Homeboy because the hospital kicked her out. And she's homeless. She had no place to go. How we in society allow people who have open heart surgery to go back out onto the streets, right? So she's back in We're doing all we can to triage and just try to help her, get her stabilized. We get her into a motel. We do all those things. 3 days after that, she dies. My gosh, I tell the story. It still gets to me. If it was, I don't know what to do, but I know if it was my daughter, I would have somehow we would have had health care. She would have had access to the doctors that I have access to, and she wouldn't have died. But poor people in our society don't have those accesses. How do we move it forward? Poverty rate in America has been the same for 45 years. Same narrow band, 12, 13%. How do we as a society do something different? And what I'm saying is what I've learned at Homeboy is we have a way of helping people move their lives forward. And then I want to take that a step further. I know businesses can step in and help. Think about it. Poverty rate in America has been the same, 12%. How about every business hires, 15% of every hire going forward, they hire people of the working poor. Because what people need is a quality job. They need a place where they can show up and have consistent hours, decent level of pay, benefits, upward mobility. But without that structure of having a job, people aren't getting out of poverty, right? So how do we get businesses to employ the unemployable? How do we get businesses to employ the working poor? How do we move that forward? And I'm telling you, we at Homeboy have done that. We have businesses. Homegirl Cafe, Zagat-rated business. There's only 12 other restaurants in downtown Los Angeles with as high of a rating. It's fully run by gang members and felons. There's no outside managers there. They do it all themselves. And so we're trying to say, what have we learned at Homeboy to kind of bring this message further along? And so you can see I'm focused on it, and that's why I wrote a book, because I think of how do we sort of get these messages out. So let me jump to this part. And I want to say this is an important part, particularly here, I get to talk to you like this at LMU. So I understand the mechanics of business, the levers to pull. I now see the struggles of the poor. I see how people, go back to the video, Jose and Andre, how they move their lives forward by us investing in them, and then they were able to get a job and actually have good jobs going forward. Their kids aren't going to be in gangs. We've stopped that intergenerational cycle of violence. But there's also other aspect that I learned at Homeboy that's so really important. It's about God and spirituality. And early on, I mean, obviously being around Father Greg, you learn so much. But for me, and Greg would say this too, I've learned so much just by looking at our fellow trainees, the homeboys and homegirls. And in short, in my observation, what allows them to move their life forward from being in victim of complex trauma to perpetrating trauma to actually changing their life forward is that they finally discover to love themselves. And they only discover love themselves because they've discovered that God loves them. And once they really feel it that God loves them, they know it, they can start loving themselves. And when they start loving themselves, they can kind of lean into that strength and get over all that pain that they've experienced in life, right? And so spiritual journey has been important, and it's been important for all the folks at Homeboy. It's really enabled me to kind of think more about it. And I just, I've had many encounters with our folks, and they're so, their depth of spiritual understanding is great. I've tried to kind of pay more attention to it. So our folks are more generous than others. They are people we want to model ourselves after. And I know it kind of sounds like a cliche, but it really is true. And I've been so thankful. I would ask a lot of these questions to Father Greg, and he would be kind enough to answer my questions. And I think at some point I asked too many questions, and he put me on this path of spiritual advisors. And so I've had 2 spiritual advisors who have been so instrumental to my understanding. So I sort of take what they say, and I also live my Homeboy experience, and it's so important. This past weekend there was the Sunday reading was of Beatitudes and Matthew. And there it said, Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, theirs is the kingdom of heaven." I read these things now, and I read these with the eyes of understanding my life at Homeboy and seeing what that means. And so for me, as I think about that now, I mean, Jesus is talking about our folks, because they have found joy through God and through each other. And in my mind, they are authentic and have more grace, because the working poor in our society, they don't have pretenses. They're not worried about getting ahead. They don't have all the other stuff that goes on in people's minds. So in my mind, they're a step closer to God and have a clearer faith and a more enduring hope. And I'd say that's an important aspect of the levers here, is understanding that, again, these are good people. And how does society sort of help people move forward? All right, so there's 3 concepts I want to get through that kind of then sort of takes to how to piece this together, right? And so my thesis is business community can do a better job improving society, getting people out of poverty, employing the working poor. But to do that, you kind of have to understand sort of 3 concepts. All right, meritocracy. The 3 concepts are meritocracy, self-worth, and joy. All right, meritocracy. I'm here to say meritocracy doesn't work for the poor in our society. Martin Luther King, 50 years ago, made this statement. I believe we ought to do all we can and seek to lift ourselves up by our own bootstraps, but it is cruel just to suggest to a bootless man to pull himself up by his bootstraps. The poor don't have boots. They don't have bootstraps. And so when society wags their finger at people and says, just work harder, why'd you make those choices? It just doesn't. They have a tough set of choices to make. They don't have that ability. They don't have the boots. Now, middle class, upper class in our society, yeah, we got boots. Let's lift ourselves up by our own bootstraps, for sure. But it doesn't work for the working poor. I want to give you another story. So at Homeboy, we have a bakery, and we make artisan bread, and there's nothing better. You saw that in the video of guys from rival gangs standing shoulder to shoulder, rolling dough. It breaks down all those barriers, and they learn to get along, right? So our bakery, we deliver bread to restaurants around LA. We also have farmers markets. We have 26 farmers markets at that time. One of our best farmers market sales guys was George. He could set up, any market he went to, he had a gift for gab, he had good charisma. He sold all his bread, and he was a great worker. All right, so one day, early on in my time at Homeboy, I'm walking through the bakery, management by walking around, and I'm hearing George talk to the bakery manager asking for the weekend off. That's a big deal, because the weekend is the busy time at farmers markets. And so we gave him time off, and so I'm, again, the newbie, not really being very aware. I'm chit-chatting and say, oh, George, what are you doing for the weekend? Thinking he's going to tell me he's going to Disneyland or something, right? And he says to me, he says, well, I'm reporting in. And I look quizzically, I said, reporting in, what's that mean? He's reporting at the county jail. And he said, I'm going to county jail. And I said, why? He said, well, that's the only way I can pay off some of my debts. So when people leave the prison system, not only do they have restitution costs that add to debts, they have to pay for the parole officer, the corrections officer, they got to pay court costs, fines and fees, and so people leave prison with debt. They accumulate debt. How do we think people who are not working in prison, earning a living, they come out, they have debt, how do we think they're going to pay it off? Now, George did try to do the right thing. He didn't want to go to his homies in his gang and ask for the money, because he's trying to leave the gang. He didn't go borrow money at a loan shark for high interest rates. At that time in LA County, you could report in for 4 days, earn off time of your debt. And so he chose to do that, right? And so I walked away from that conversation like stunned. A, he has that debt, but B, he's like, oh my gosh, that guy's trying to do it the right way. I'm driving home thinking, how would I have done that? Okay, thought about it all weekend. Come in on Tuesday, I make a beeline. I want to talk to George, see how it went. I see him, and I ask him about it. I see the stress on his face. And the stress is, he tells me this, he says, well, he had custody of his 2 children, 10 and 8. And now, he came out of prison, custody of his children, doesn't have family support, doesn't have family around, doesn't want to ask his homies to help. The caregiver who was supposed to come take care of his children didn't show up, couldn't make it. So he still had to report. So he reported in for 4 days, county jail, left the 10-year-old and 8-year-old in their apartment in his apartment by themselves for 4 days. Just think about the stress you would be under thinking you left your children alone for 4 days. Right? Quickly, the end of the story is the kids have turned out fine. Right? But the lesson I'm trying to impart to you is it's so easy for us to judge. Oh, that was a bad decision. You should have never done that. You put your children in danger. Oh my gosh, you had such trouble with choices. Right? Why do you make those choices? And so the other thing I learned at Homeboy is not to judge people by their actions. You don't know what's behind it all. And so when meritocracy is about by your hard work and by your abilities, you're going to get ahead, and that's the way that we live in a meritocracy environment. That's the way it should be. It doesn't exist for guys like George. Look how hard he worked. He still got put behind. You know, to me, and it was a tough thing for me to get because, look, I went into Homeboy, massive believer in the American dream. You know, through my own hard work, I'm going to get ahead. And if someone else didn't do as good of a job, then they were behind. So I was in that dynamic of run to the top, for sure. But now I'm saying, but I see how it doesn't really work for folks who are poor in our society. So I remember having a dialogue with Father Greg about this. And I was talking about, you know, we need to promote people based upon their merits and how they go forward. And so Greg asked me, he says, listen, and I was talking about the American dream. He says, listen, he says, now I want to get this right. He says, is meritocracy a worthiness code? I thought that was kind of interesting. Is meritocracy a worthiness code? So, and I had to think hard about that. And I've had to think, well, what if businesses are set up based on merit system, the more you're successful, you got promoted, what do we do in a Homeboy that's different? And how to articulate that? And so it comes down to self-worth. We help people find meaning in the job. We want to have thriving workplaces. So people work for us, you know, not just the working poor, people work for us to find self-worth in the job. And so it's about finding meaning. You know, at Homeboy, we don't have a merit-based system. We have a values-based system. We help people with thriving. We help people with stability. We help people find the joy they have in their work. Now, look, I'm not naive. I worked in the corporate world. So, you know, I know that people are going to say, well, how do you promote people along the way? But workplace successes lead to feeling self-worth and thriving. And so you don't have to sort of measure people from top to bottom. Problem with meritocracy, you're measuring people. And once you start measuring people, then you start realizing that some people don't measure up to other people. And that there are some winners and losers once you start measuring people. Right? And think about what Homeboy does. People don't find their own God-given goodness faster or sooner than somebody else, or more or better. So it's like, as a society, we have to stop measuring and thinking that it's all about how to achieve workplace success, but it's about finding meaning at work. And so, great statement by Greg, the ego thrives on success, but the soul finds vitality in work. All right. Joy. Joy, to me, joy is foundational to a thriving workplace. And I want to tell you this, and put it in this frame, why I want to talk about joy. And it's about finding joy through others, for sure. All right. And so a number of years ago, so running Homeboy's not always been the easiest thing. We constantly run out of money because we give every nickel we can to help people out along the way. And so we're always looking we need to raise money from donors. And for the first 8 years of doing this, it was a stressful situation. And we would raise, $18 million a year. We would spend $18 million. Have a plan going forward. But that year when we thought we were going to raise $18 million and only raised $17 million, that put us behind by $1 million. And that really put us on the skids. And so one year it was very difficult, about 5-6 years ago. Very difficult. We were constantly behind. We borrowed money, as much money from the bank as we could borrow. And once you start borrowing money to make payroll, you got not a good business model, okay? So it's not a good thing. but we had to do all we can to find money. And so I was stressed. So to me, the whole half a year, I saw everything through the prism of, are we going to make it? Are we going to succeed or not? And when donors gave us money, if donors gave us $10,000, I would be upset they didn't give us $20,000, right? I would be judging my friends. Did you give us money, not give us money? So to me, the stress of the job was getting to me, right? Thankfully, I have time at the end of every year to sit back and kind of reflect and do the reading and learn what we're doing at Homeboy. And I was reading this one book, and it's not a new concept, but it struck me for the first time. The Jesuit concept of the call of the king. Right. And so in the call of the king, the grace we pray for is not to be deaf to the Lord's call. The call of the king mobilizes our energies. It invites us to get in touch with our dream of making a better world and to see how God fills that world. And so the concept of the call of the king, which sort of struck me at that time, that call of the king, it's about action versus just thoughts of thinking about God. It was actually living the life God wants us to live. So it's a commitment to making a better work environment. And so I was emailing Greg, and Greg and I have this good email pen pal relationship. And so I say, hey, look, all of a sudden I feel a little bit better. I'm now understanding this concept of the call of the king. And so Greg answers back, and he writes, the call of the king. These things get muddled for us. Often we think it's even possible for there to be a gulf between God's will for me and what I most deeply want. Greg says, not true. The great discovery in life is to finally know that what I most deeply want is what God's will for me is. So the trick is not to be deaf to the Lord's call. If it ain't a pleasure, it ain't a poem, as Greg would say. But God's will isn't about, this is an important part, God's will isn't about hard work and suffering, but my joy, yours, your joy complete. So he says, find joy in the place. He says it's hard because it's hard to be called to joy. We're human. But once you flip that switch, you choose to see people and to hear people. It's like, oh, I'm thinking, wow, all of a sudden it's about seeing people and hearing people. Because Greg goes on to say, because then people, the staff, the trainees, the friends, feel valued, loved, and received tenderly. And then they'll do anything for you. So think about that. If you care about your staff and receive your staff, they'll do anything. They'll want to work. Otherwise, people feel judged, less than, and disappointment. And so our default position, because we're human, is to focus on deficits. But if we choose to see people, that's going to make the difference in the workplace. And so if you think about businesses, they ask me how to do it. It's seeing people. It's finding joy through others is how to make that happen. It's my joy, yours, your joy complete. And it's clear. Again, it's about when you see unshakable goodness among all the woundedness, people come alive. And so, back to the thesis, hire the working poor, create a thriving workplace. It's about seeing them as humans, seeing them through their woundedness. And that's how you create joy in the workplace to make it foundational. And the other thing is, now a lot of you are young, so you have a whole life ahead of you, you can do this. It's about making that shift in your brain. It really is flipping the switch. Look for the joy. Look for the graces you see every day and say, oh, that's joy. And once I started focusing on finding the joy through others, and there's lots of joy at Homeboy. I mean, I get such joy when trainees come up to me and, whether they show me they're going to community college, they show me their report card, or they come up to me and show me the picture. They went to school with their young son and had a Halloween parade. Stuff they never had parents do for them, that they're doing for their children they never thought they would be, and how excited they are. That's joy through others along the way. And so it's looking for those joyful moments that say, oh, all the stresses we can take care of. We'll figure out how to go find the money if we focus on, we're looking for the joy constantly out there. Two more quotes on joy. Our greatest joy is when we seek to do good for others. And that is so true. It's finding joy through people. And then LMU's mystic himself, Father Randy. And I remember talking to Randy about joy, and he said this to me, and I'm quickly writing down what he said. Joy is the infallible sign of the presence of God. Isn't that a great way of thinking about it? Right. So listen, I have learned so much at Homeboy. I've seen the corporate world. I now see the struggles of the working poor. And for corporations that need to hire more of the working poor, you need to think about meritocracy, self-worth, and joy. And I got to tell you, I feel my life is so blessed by being in this community of Homeboy. I feel I've made more friends and I've had more laughter and crying in the last number of years of my whole life put together. And I just thank you for letting me share this with you as we go on.
Thank you so much, Tom. Profoundly inspirational, your experience, what you've learned, your coming to be with us and bringing joy to us. Thank you so much for being with us. We'd like to have an opportunity for some question and answer and dialogue. I think you're going to take a comfortable seat there. And any questions, anything that anyone would like to ask Tom to speak to? And yes, sir.
Yeah. We heard a few months back that Homeboy is raising money to expand physically, to build housing. Maybe you could talk about that, Tom?
Yeah. We do what's called, reentry services. So when people try to reenter back in society out of the prison system, so we provide all those services under one roof. The one thing we don't do is provide housing for people. Housing is an important aspect of, I think, a service we need going forward. Listen, when people leave gang life behind, when they choose to leave gang life behind, they're essentially saying they're leaving behind family and friends they've had, and they're leaving behind their neighborhood. And so it's important for people to fully get out of that gang life, is they need a safe spot to live. And what we're trying to do is build transitional housing, just like dorm style living. As so when people are in our program, they'll be living in that facility. So we're trying to do a partnership with the city, where the city deeds over some property, so we can, and thereby we're raising money to do it. We want to do it in a private way. Homeboy always does things differently. There's a lot of government money out there, but if we use private funds to build housing, that means we can keep that housing just for our population. We know we have a core competency of working with gang members, and so we want to make sure that facility would be there for them, for the housing side.
Are there any other industries you're trying to get into in the future with Homeboy?
Yeah, good question. So we have, we're growing. We have electronic recycling business. So state of California, everybody's got to properly dispose of their electronics, cell phones, computers, and all. And we've had that now for 5 years. We made that acquisition 5 years ago, and it's really been growing nicely. And what's interesting, what's a side part of that of late, is apparel recycling, right? And so we now have a relationship with Guess, the brand Guess, and and then we actually got a grant out of Nordstrom's. They, like all these big retailers, these big brands, they have a lot of unsold products, and so they got to figure out how to properly dispose of those products. And what they don't want to do, they don't want to sort of sell on a discount market, because then it affects their brand. But up to now, they've been putting it into landfill, and so they're working with us to come up with apparel recycling and upcycling some of that apparel. The other business we want to get into is, we're trying to get onto this more the green space, so electronic vehicles. Think about it this way: there's going to be a lot more electronic vehicles. Going to be a lot more electronic vehicle charging stations. Someone's got to maintain those charging stations, so we're trying to skill up our folks to do that work. And so we're trying to put more businesses out there so we can provide more quality jobs. On the fundraising side, and you mentioned this in the bio, we have a Homeboy Venture and Jobs Fund, where what I've tried to do is take the venture fund model that happens in the for-profit world and replicate that in our world, whereby we take money, donor money, and invest in Homeboy type businesses so that we can provide jobs for the graduates of our programs.
In the video, I noticed that the names were like their name and then Homeboy graduate. I was just wondering if you could expand a little bit on what it means for someone to be a graduate.
Yeah. So what we talk about when we talk about graduates of the Homeboy program is that they've gone through our 18-month we call our 18-month program. And in that 18-month, when people first come in to Homeboy, they walk through the doors, they just have a sense they want to change their life. They don't know how to. They don't know how to get out of gangs. They don't know how to move it forward. And so we bring them in, and for the most part, we pay them when they first come in, but they're not doing any work. They have a therapist, they have a case manager, they have anger management, they go to DV counseling, they go and get their high school diploma, and eventually they start working into our businesses. And near the end of those 18 months, they mostly work in our businesses, and still do a little of the programming side. After 18 months, we graduate them, and they get them jobs outside of Homeboy.
Yeah, I'm having a little bit of a trouble because there's the three things that you said for a business. It has to be competitive, you have to have a good product, and then you have to have the people relationship. Where does Homeboy stand in being a viable business? But I see also there's the fundraising, because you're also doing like social work. That's not a business. You're giving away money. Does that cross over? How much do you have that's actual businesses? Because I think that's your ultimate goal, right, is to create all these businesses that stand by themselves.
Right, so I'll frame it up this way. So today we're a $35 million organization. Raised $35 million, spend $35 million. So of that $35 million, about $22 million is donor support. About $10 million comes from our business revenue. And then the balance, about $3 to $5 million, is government funds, so federal, state, county, city funds. So less than 5% of our funding comes from the government. I'm kind of frustrated. I would like it to be 30% of our funding from the government. We are blessed with donors, thankfully, who see the value of what we do. And so while we run, probably like a dozen social enterprise businesses, many of our businesses can actually compete in the for-profit space, but we choose to actually have 2 to 3 times as much labor in some of those businesses because it's a training program, because we want to create training opportunities along the way. And so our bakery and our cafe, those are we have massive amount of people. We run the business, everything else is run like a for-profit business except the labor line, where we actually have a lot of labor. Now we have a business like Homeboy Electronic Recycling and like our silk screen operation, where we run those almost as a for-profit way, so that then the profit margin, whatever comes back to us, we bring back to the mothership of the programming side. But for the most part, the donors pay for the programming, what we provide. The businesses kind of cover the business expense side.
And in your comment, when you talked about meritocracy, I was wondering how these guys get paid. Do they all get paid the same?
Yeah, so when they come into our program, it's pretty standard. We give them grants, and we give them, when they work in our business, we give them pay. We give them the minimum wage, a little bit above minimum wage these days, $16 an hour. But it's important, as we're looking to grow the businesses, is to, let me say it this way. Our folks are very talented. I've run lots of different businesses. Our workforce is just as any other workforce out there. And I know our managers, 90% of our businesses managers are former clients. I know if they actually didn't have their background, they can go get a job in a for-profit business and make a lot more money. So our goal with this Venture and Jobs Fund is to have side businesses that run like for-profit, so we can pay people market-based wages based upon their abilities along the way. But in the program side, it's a minimum wage type of effort.
Okay, because now they only say, I want a raise.
They always want raises. They always need more money. But the flip side, you didn't say it this way, but it's like, what is interesting to me is there's no doubt if they want to earn an honest day's wage. I wanted that to be really clear to everybody. They know they can go make a heck of a lot more money doing a lot of illegal things. And they're asked to do that all the time by their homies. But they want to do it. Deep down, they don't like that lifestyle. They want to change, and they're willing to get by on what we're able to offer. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I just wanted to ask you, I was looking at the Homeboy Cafe and thinking, I'm going to swerve my Starbucks tomorrow morning because the muffins look a lot better there, so I'm going to go and see that. But then that made me think, where is there opportunity? Starbucks has a corporate social responsibility scheme that it wants to look good, it wants to show its values. Is there the merit in trying to get a company that has those same values, that takes on people that have come out of the Homeboy graduate scheme, and can you leverage that in a different way?
Yeah, I want to answer that question in two different ways. So the question is about corporations that have their own social responsibility platforms, and how do we partner with them, or could we partner with them to be beneficial for our people? Absolutely, we're always trying for that. And interestingly, on Starbucks, Starbucks ran into a problem a couple of years ago because they were criticized how poorly they do on the diversity front and not understanding the neighborhoods. And so I've been calling up Starbucks for a few years now, saying, whoa, 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 give me a Starbucks franchise, and I'll bring my workforce to that franchise, and we'll make you all proud. I've yet to make that sale happen. Getting close, but I've yet to make that happen, right? And so, again, it's hard for businesses to kind of see what this is all about, and this, in part, wanted to write the book to kind of get the message in a more complete way about it. But I kind of want to tell you a story that makes me angry, a little bit akin to that question. And, this is right after the George Floyd murder, right? What does society go through? Society went through a massive amount of awakening to the struggles of people in our society, of this, system-wide racism, system-wide injustices, right? Okay, all good awakening. So there's a Fortune 10 company, not Fortune 500, a Fortune 10 company. Their president wrote a letter, and it was probably published in like a Wall Street Journal and all these other places, wrote a letter talking about their pledge, what it was like for him to grow up as a person of color, their pledge to move forward, how he sees what society has failed in, what society can go to. Beautifully written letter. I have no problems with any of that, so don't take this the wrong way. We go knock on that corporation's door before that letter came out and after that letter came out and said, we know you have electronic waste. Please allow us to come get your, please contract with us. Pay us $100 for a pickup fee. We'll take that waste back. We'll put people to work who wouldn't be employed anywhere else. And if we weren't employing them, they'd be back on the streets running with gangs. We're going to have our guys deconstruct that waste and then put it in the proper space. I can't get that corporation to spend $100 with me to pick up their waste, because there's another competitor out there who picks it up for free and then ships and then has it disposed over in China. So they don't care. So it's like, how do you get, I know the CEO cares, but there's so much bureaucracy in the system that what happens at the ground level that doesn't have impact. And so our struggle is to be kind, because we're trying to create relationships with people, not to be wagging our finger at corporations. But at the same time, it's like, whoa, there's one thing about corporate rhetoric, right? And there's another thing about what happens, really helping people. This wasn't in the question either. ESG is a topic that's out there quite a bit, right? And what frustrates me is that many of these Wall Street firms, the private equity guys, they're all creating funds to go invest in ESG type companies. ESG.
Environmental, social, governance.
Thank you. I knew you would have it better than me, and so essentially, it's not investing in any corporation with this, the sins, the tobacco, the alcohol, that type of thing, right? So it's nothing wrong with the concept of let's invest in companies with ESG focus, right? But I'm saying, listen, but they're still promising their customers the same return on investment as anything else. So they're not going to, those ESG funds aren't going to invest in people-oriented businesses, right? It's almost, in many ways, it's immoral to say, if you're going to people-oriented business, it's immoral to think you're going to get 18% return on your investment. Come on, live with 5% return on investment if you're providing good jobs and quality jobs going forward. And so I'm figuring out a way, how do we kind of get the thing, how do you get the next step of ESG into being about the people-oriented businesses along the way?
So it's such an important question. I'm seeing that's something that we wrestle with in class. Sometimes I want to do good, and if I can do good and do as well as I would otherwise, well, that's the sweet
easy.
spot.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then it's not a question of not hitting certain profit numbers, but how much profit is enough, and what are the costs for just pursuing profit? And that's a little bit of what you're bringing as a question to how we think about business practice and corporate life.
Sure.
And that was one thing I wondered, and maybe it's this, maybe you have other observations. You've shared a lot of what you've learned through this experience with Homeboy. What would you ask business to learn through the lens of your experience? It's a very broad question, but it's kind of bringing it into the environment of for-profit business.
Back to the hire the working poor, invest in them with support services, and you're going to end up with a very loyal workforce. And so if you take it from a pure business guy, numbers point of view, every business, particularly business with lots of employees, struggle to find labor, struggle to find quality management, struggle to find people who are quote unquote loyal to them, right? Here's a workforce. I mean, look, 1/3 of all males in the United States actually have some type of incarceration record going forward. You have to think about this as a viable workforce, and you have to sort of invest in them as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other question? Well, Tom, thank you so very much for being with us today. Just a round of applause, please, for the opportunity. Deeply appreciate what you've shared on multiple levels. You've spoken really with your deep business experience and business insight. This recognition of these two Americas and how we really need to really be in kinship with and walk with the poor as a critical dimension of all of our lives is something that you pointed out. And then this understanding really of how it connects with our own spiritualities and how do we really understand what we're meant to be about as human beings and seek to achieve that in what we do every day. You've shared that really profoundly. We would like to thank Thomas Vozzo and Homeboy Industries for the opportunity for this time with him. But also on behalf of the College of Business Administration, I'd like to thank the CSJ Center for Reconciliation and Justice. This presentation is part of their annual symposium. Every year it focuses on a dimension of justice. This one's called Deepening Encounters, Confronting the Struggles. And really that's what you've shared, your journey of encounter and the invitation for us to also really fully embrace a journey of encounter, really in the pursuit really of ennobling ourselves and others in this experience of kinship. And thank you so very much. It's an absolute honor. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Good.